This is a story almost 200 years in the making. A story that starts in the American frontier with pioneer families, innovative farming, and lifelong friendships. Join me as we follow visionaries whose leadership and dedication led to the acquisition of over 3 million acres in Canada, the largest privately owned business of its time, and 200 square miles in the fields of South Texas. When one thinks of South Texas Syndicate, the first thing that may come to mind is oil. Crude oil, black gold, Texas tea. But the oil that brought great success to the original purchasers of South Texas Syndicate was of a much different type. It was linseed oil, a colorless, yellow-tinted oil obtained from dried and ripened seeds of the flax plant. Due to its polymer-forming properties, linseed oil is often blended with combinations of other oils as a drying oil finish and a pigment binder for oil-based paints. Most paint used before the 1920s contained primarily pigment and boiled linseed oil. The qualities of this type of paint eliminated the chance of paint buildup, flaking, and peeling. It has been speculated that at one time, 20% of the world's linseed oil was produced within a partnership of the original purchasers of South Texas Syndicate. Now, let's pick up the story of the pioneers from Garden City and Vernon Center as their sons became young entrepreneurs in the Industrial Revolution of the United States. In 1879, George Piper, the original title holder of the South Texas Syndicate acreage, gave up his teaching position to become a bookkeeper for R.D. Hubbard, one of the wealthiest businessmen in Mankato and owner of the Mankato Linseed Oil Mill. This is where the relationship with linseed oil begins. George worked his way up through the business, eventually outgrowing his job as a bookkeeper and buying out Mr. Hubbard's interests in the mill. Before George left his position, he helped find his replacement, a young family friend, Ellsworth C. Warner, thus beginning E.C. Warner's career in the linseed oil business. In 1883, George married Grace Brett. Grace's older brother, Rufus Brett, worked closely with the original owners of South Texas Syndicate, and Rufus Brett was the agent that was sent by the STS business pioneers to Cotulla, Texas, to buy the property in 1906. During George Piper's 9-year business career in Mankato, he worked on many different diverse business ventures. One such project included the Mankato streetcar program with John A. Willard, a man who worked with George at the Mankato Linseed Oil Mill. With George's fellow Garden City native E.C. Warner, the Willard Cattle Company was organized. In 1887, J.L. Washburn, George's friend and colleague teaching in Vernon Center, along with E.C., created a new loan company called the Western Land Company. In late 1887, George decided to leave Mankato to purchase a linseed mill in Detroit. After a few years there, George left Detroit, then a successful businessman, to explore real estate in then thriving Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth was a welcome location at the time. It was dynamic, a growing new city, and a few years earlier, Amos Warner
A.C. Warner's older brother, and George's schoolmate at the famous Garden City one-room schoolhouse, had moved to Duluth with his wife, Hattie Piper, George's younger sister. There they invested in real estate, timber, and farmland in northern Minnesota. Duluth boasted that it was the only port in the United States with access to both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans because of the Great Lakes Waterway and the new Western Railways. The discovery of new Iron Range locations in northern Minnesota also energized and populated the area. In Duluth, George would find his fellow teacher, business partner, and childhood friend, Jed Washburn, who had also moved to Duluth with his wife, Alma Patty. Washburn, while expanding his business career, had kept up with his passion for education by serving as president of the Mankato Board of Education for several years. He developed an ardor for the law in his early life and began working for the law office of Judge M.J. Severance in Mankato. In May of 1880, Washburn was admitted into the bar. 10 years later, Jed Washburn moved to the thriving new metropolis of Duluth, Minnesota, to practice law and eventually partner with Judge Chas L. Lewis to create a powerful, prestigious law firm. In 1893, the United States suffered a very serious and general financial panic. The Duluth boom suddenly flattened out, and many investors lost money. George Piper was not unscathed by this situation, and while this panic certainly hurt his finances, it also impacted his health. After taking many months to recuperate in faraway California, George returned to his birth state,
to Minneapolis. It was at this time that he and his business partner created the new company, Douglas & Company, that focused on linseed oil production.
George Piper's new partner, and someone who became one of his closest lifetime friends, was Walter Douglas from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Douglas's father, George Douglas, was a very successful businessman who was a partner in a cereal mill in Cedar Rapids, which later contributed to the formation of Quaker Oats.
In his younger years, Walter Douglas attended Shattuck Military Academy in Faribault, Minnesota. With Mankato and Faribault being large towns in southern Minnesota, one can only wonder if the paths of these two lifelong friends crossed earlier in their youth. In the spring of 1894, having recovered from his illness, George returned to the linseed oil business with the organization of Douglas & Company, and the construction of a mill in Minneapolis began.